Welcome back to Pappy Tinkers and part 3 of the Italeri Sherman Fury build. I come across a few more issues with this kit, although one of them may have been something I did wrong. Come along and watch as I continue with some of the good and bad with this kit, plus I start the painting and weathering in this video. Time to put on the Fender extensions and all those little support brackets. There are plenty of photo etch options out there if you want to go that way, but I'm trying to build this one as close to box stock as I can. The Fender themselves go on pretty easy, although there are no placement points. If you get the first one a little bit off, when you go to put on the front fenders or the rear mud flaps, there could be some fit issues. Yes, I trim and sand each little piece. This is another one of those places where if you don't, it'll really stand out. So take a little extra time and run a sanding stick over them. There actually is a top and bottom to these parts. The bottom, which goes on the fender, has a little bump sticking out that goes into a corresponding spot on the fender. The top is cut at a 45-degree angle that goes against the hull. Take a close look and you'll be able to see it. I missed it on the first one I put on, so check your progress every so often to make sure that everything is correctly aligned. This will be one of those times where getting a slower glue like the Tamiya Extra Thin might work a little bit better, so that you can make adjustments even after a few minutes. The other side is just as much fun as the first, but I did develop a rhythm that seemed to make it go easier. I put a drop of glue on the fender, placed the bracket, then added glue to the top. It seemed to look a little bit neater that way also. If this looks boring to you, it is, but it's a lot faster and easier than photo etched. And I really don't think it looks hugely out of scale. Italeri is usually pretty good about making parts thin. If you're worried about the glue spots that you're seeing, don't. That's one of the nice things about this liquid glue, is that it's so thin, after paint and weathering, you won't see any of them. I wanted to point out that there are no real placement spots for parts number 50 and 51. You have to use the rear mud guards to help find the right spots. I can't tell if this big gap is something I did or an error in the kit. Either way, I ended up with this big gap between the upper hull and the transmission cover. A gap like this is not hard to fill, but you do need to take extra care not to mess up the bolt details. The way I'm going to fix this is with some stretched sprue. If you've never done this, start with a piece of sprue that doesn't have any attachment points. Slowly heat the sprue by moving it back and forth over a candle while gently pulling apart. When you think you have the correct thickness, stop pulling, but keep enough pressure on it that the warm plastic stays straight, or else it'll curl up and you'll have to start all over again. Trim it to length. Mine was a little bit too thick, so I sanded it a little bit to make it a little closer fit, and then spread a little putty over of your choice on it. Let it dry overnight. The next morning I used a sanding file or two and that made quick work of the repair. I tried to be extra careful with the sanding because I had drilled out the end of the Bell machine gun, and I didn't want to have to try to glue that back together. I added some more Mr. Surfacer 500 to the transmission cover to help blend in my repair. I think it turned out pretty good. For the movie tank, you want to use these tracks, the ones with the spare track links on them. The bad news is they have ejector pin marks on each and every link. And of course, the side that has them is the side that'll be showing on the front plate of the hull. I'll try to fill one set with the tester's putty and the other spare link with the Tamiya putty, and hopefully one of them will work. The front fenders look way too perfect. So you can take a sharp X-Acto knife and just skim a little bit off in a couple places, just to make it look a little bit dented up. And then you clean those up a little bit with a round or curved file just to get some of the jagged edges off. And once you get a little bit of primer on these, it'll look more like dented instead of cut plastic. Some people like to paint the stowage on the tank, and some people like to attach it afterwards. If you're going to paint it on the tank, test a couple layouts to see that you can make sure and actually paint the items where they're going to be sitting. Most of the tarps and bedroll type stuff, because of the way they curve down and under, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get the coverage on the down sides of these than it would be, let's say, a wooden box or shovel. Let's get a little primer on the turret and have it ready for paint. I've gone ahead and glued everything on here that I want to have on. A couple things are going to be painted off the model. That's just a matter of personal preference. The same for the hull. I've already got everything glued on that I want to paint while it's on the model. The rest of the stuff, like the tarps, I'm going to paint off the model and then glue them on with a little bit of super glue or white glue afterwards. See if we can get a close-up of that texture now that's on that cast transmission cover. It's hard to get into focus, but there's a lot of texture with that, and we filled that gap pretty nicely. Here we go with a basic black shading of the model. We tried to get all the recesses inside the weld lines around the hatches, dark underneath, and it looks like we're about ready for a little bit of green. I usually use the Tamiya paints, and today I'm using their XF62 olive drab, mixed about 50-50 with 90% rubbing alcohol. I usually get good coverage, and I like the easy cleanup. I don't know who has the most accurate color, but I do know that by the time you put on some weathering, some fading, some shading, and dust, it's not going to be the same color that came out of the bottle anyways. Use the paints that seem to work best for you and that are easy to get. But as I've changed climates recently, and the humidity and air and stuff may be different, I might be changing that. I do know some paints prefer to only use their specific reducers. I suggest doing some experimenting on your own to see what works best for you. Not just with ratios, but with reducers as well. We'd rather spend more of our money buying kits than paint. Look at that, that's looking good. You can see the texture on that front transmission cover. There are kits that you can buy that are made just for individual type tanks for the wheels to do this with, and strangely they run about the same price as one of these templates from the big box hobby stores. Actually, some of them cost a lot more than what you get in the hobby store. What makes this so nice is that if you've already gotten a better coat of the black rubber on here, better than I did this time anyways, then all you have to do is just a little bit of touch up, and it saves a whole lot of time in painting the wheels. It may seem like I'm doing things out of order by starting to add mud at this stage, but for a tank that has seen as much action as the Fury, it's going to have mud and dirt everywhere. And with all the suspension together, you'll not be able to get it all back behind all those bogey wheels. Dab some in, flick, and tap your brush just to fling it all up in there. And when this dries, it'll be a lot lighter, just like real mud. After this dries, I'll add a coat of Tester's Dull Coat to lock it down. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Happy Tinkers and building the Fury Sherman, and maybe even learned a trick or two. Check back soon for the next episode, or better yet, click that like and subscribe buttons to get the updates. Be safe and build something. See you next time on Happy Tinkers.